And welcome back to the Steve Malzberg Show, ladies and gentlemen. And joining us now is our friend, Hank Sheinkopf. He's a Democratic strategist and so much more. Hank, always good to see you.
Good to be here.
Well, thank you. All right, so we just spoke with Jonathan Allen, the author of HRC. First of all, he did come in and weigh in, and he agrees with my boss and the CEO of Newsmax Media, Chris Ruddy, who wrote a piece today. It's getting a lot of talk that Rand Paul was a rising star, made a big mistake in trying to link Hillary to Bill's past indiscretion, shall we say. Agree?
Chris Ruddy is 100% right, not because he's the CEO, because he's just plain right. It doesn't help Rand Paul, and by the way, it doesn't help Republicans, because that is a chapter that people kind of want closed. They had enough. They had enough at the time. They've had enough now.
Now, what Allen did say is that there's a lot of concern that that you do get this package deal that they used to talk about when it was Bill at the top of the ticket and Hillary unofficially right. Having an office in the wing, and now they're saying that one of their main problems is thinking about the prospect of Bill Clinton roaming the halls of the White House after he had been president. It's unprecedented, obviously. Right. Is that a big impediment, you think?
In states where people are thinking about that, they're not voting for anyway. That's not the issue. The issue is larger than that. Is she really going to be the nominee? Why are people presuming that 2 years out? And what does that really mean?
All right, well, what does that really mean? I did present to Alan a challenge from the left, and it's been talked about that Jerry Brown, Elizabeth Warren, someone. He doesn't seem to put much credence into the fact that there might be a challenge, but he doesn't think it's going to succeed because of Hillary's machine, although Hillary had a machine and it didn't succeed in 2008.
A lot of this will depend on what the 2014 midterm elections look like, what happens in the Senate, what happens in the House, what happens in local elections, and frankly, people may just be tired of 30 years or more of the Clintons. That may be, and her health is another issue. I mean, doing a presidential campaign, whether you're an operative or the candidate, is not a pleasant experience. You don't stop. That being said, do you want to put somebody through that at that age? I mean, Dwight Eisenhower was 70 when he left the White House, but he never really killed himself to get to the White House.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk, shift gears and talk about really the news of the day, and that is what's happening over in Ukraine.
Yep.
It's a situation that's gone from bad to worse in a very short amount of time. You believe it's Barack Obama's fault?
I think Barack Obama and the foreign policy of this administration are responsible for this. It's very simple. When he took office, he was more concerned with looking into Putin's eyes and believing the nonsense that a guy who wants to repeat the role of the czars of the Soviets would in fact tell him. And the end result was he did not protect our relationship sufficiently with the Ukraine and with Poland, both the entries for the Russians historically into Europe. He sat back and he watched and he let the Russians do whatever they want. Well, they're now doing what they want. And the chaos there and the fascist dictatorship that is running Georgia today are all functions of Americans' bad foreign policy and the fear that the Poles feel every day because they don't know, based upon their own history, whether the great powers, in this case the United States, will stand with them in the event the Soviets show up.
And I don't see
well,
any
the
way.
Russians, forgive me.
I don't see any way. It's going back towards the Soviets type regime. I mean, do you fear another Cold War?
We are in a Cold War, and the reality is very simple. Poland afraid, Ukraine in chaos, Georgia under fascist dictatorship, the Middle East in chaos. Why? The excuse is about religious freedom. Reasonable argument by Putin, but what's really at stake? He doesn't want Assad fooled with because the dream is still to make sure that the Russians have tremendous influence in the region where they've played for the last 65 years.
And so when Barack Obama comes out and warns Ukraine and has Joe Biden called the president of Ukraine, what do warnings from the U.S. mean anymore?
Listen, why don't the people in those countries look, they laugh hysterically and they say the Iranians are about to get a blue water fleet and go into the east coast of the United States, and they're probably active in Venezuela today preparing to blow us up. The Monroe Doctrine doesn't matter. America's commitments to overseas allies don't matter, and deterrence doesn't matter. What do they think is in this world? This is a place filled with bad people who want to do atrocious things to people who believe in God. Simple.
Right. So Hank, what does Hillary do? Getting back to Hillary, she was Secretary of State for all these years while all these seeds were being planted and nothing was being done. How does she run away from that?
She's going to run away from it. Well, she's a terrific candidate. She's extraordinarily smart. She's much tougher than Bill Clinton. I mean, I worked for the president. I know the former secretary well, Secretary Clinton. Well, I know her. She's one tough cookie. I met her the first time in the 80s in the mansion, in the governor's mansion in Little Rock. She's a tough cookie, and she's extraordinarily bright and adept.
But how does she separate? The question is, how does she separate herself from Obama? Whether it's on health care, you know, the revelations in the Diane Blair papers
Right.
were that she was for single payer in the first place, though she denied it. Of course, many say that her blueprint is what Obama went with and is
I'm not sure
more or less, but so, I mean, she can't.
We have, I want to correct the record.
Yeah.
We do have single payer. It's called Medicare.
Okay, but we're not talking about the Medicare.
I'm
We're
just
talking
telling you
about
we
for
have
everybody
Medicare.
else. But she's going to have a hard time saying, oh, I was never for this chaos, because by then it's going to be I believe it's going to be total chaos. And on foreign policy, how do you separate yourself when you were Secretary of State? How do you run away from the disasters in Egypt, in Ukraine, and in Libya, and everywhere else, Syria? I mean, she was at the helm.
But she's not at the helm now, and Americans, like all people, have short-term memories. Okay? Amnesia is a critical part of American politics, whether you're a Republican or Democrat. Amnesia is what helps people get elected.
We love amnesia. Got to go for amnesia. All right, let me ask you about this. CBO report yesterday said that if you raise the minimum wage, you're going to lose 500,000 jobs within an X number of years. And I mean, this is what business leaders and Republicans have been saying for forever. Now, there are studies that Democrats point to, but I mean, the CBO has been devastating to the Obama administration in recent weeks on health care and now on the minimum wage issue.
Sure.
I mean, now I would say, how do they combat that? But they don't have to, because they have a media that spins it in their favor or ignores it completely. But that's not a good, I mean, doesn't bolster their argument at all.
Look, I don't think there's an argument about the minimum wage increase. You have to somehow create a situation where people make sufficient money to support themselves. You're going to have people lying around the street. You look at LA 10, 15, 20 years ago. Down Hollywood was a mess with homeless. I mean, it was just extraordinary. You can't have it. So if the minimum wage is not the way you do it, you have another correcting mechanism. We're not creating jobs, and we're saying the minimum wage is not going to work. So what are we going to do with those folks? We're going to have civil rebellion in the streets? Is that what's going to happen? Because that's what's going to happen ultimately if we don't create an economy that is more inclusionary.
Well, but I don't think the minimum wage has anything to do with that, especially if we see that it's going to businesses will have to lay people off. So I don't know that minimum wage is the answer, but I think we have a president who might be purposely putting forth these policies that he knows are going to result in chaos.
That may be the case, but helping small businesses by reforming the tax picture that small businesses have to live through in states where they're doubly taxed, as in New York, where people are paying in subchapter S corporations, where they're paying additional taxes on the money that the subchapter S corporation earns and that they earn. Getting rid of those taxes would be a way to protect small business, protect those jobs. And Obama, the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare to many, is in fact deleterious to the health of those small businesses.
Oh, absolutely, in so many ways, shapes, and forms. So what would you advise? Getting back to Hillary again, what would you advise her to do? Would you advise her to adopt some of the things you're saying and positions you're presenting here today?
Absolutely, and talk about helping real people who work for real livings. Okay, they're disappearing in America because the jobs and the opportunities are disappearing. It is part of the problem that all globalized economies face. But the reality is, talk about tax deductions for college education, particularly for community college education. Talk about finding tax incentives for people who want to go into the sciences, okay? For people who want those opportunities. Challenge America to stand up and do what it should do, which is to be America, and don't put small businesses out of business. The South is particularly sensitive to that. Just because people in the South are Republicans doesn't mean you ought to put them out of business, okay?
Yeah.
Simple.
And take away the penalty that Obama probably wants to institute for art history majors.
Ugh, ridiculous. We need people who think in large terms, not in small terms. And this president is proving again, when it comes to foreign policy, and when it comes to small business, and when it comes to telling people what they ought to learn and not learn, he thinks small, not big.
We haven't even touched on Israel and when it comes to foreign policy. We will. Well, you'll be back next hour, I believe, or maybe not. I don't know. But we'll talk about it. We're out of time in this segment, just about. Great talking to you.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm sure if Hillary hasn't signed you up yet, she will be signing you up because
we shall see.
You're a Democrat with Koch used to call himself a liberal with sanity.
I'm not a liberal, but
no, you're a Democrat with a lot of common sense.
I am a Harry Truman Democrat. I'm proud to be so.
You're not sticking to an ideological, rant that makes no sense in this day and age. Okay, Hank Sheinkopf, ladies and gentlemen, always a pleasure to see you, Hank. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. All right, folks. When we come back, we will be joined by Michael Rubin, American Enterprise Institute scholar and Middle East expert, and he's got a brand new book, "Dancing with the Devil: The Perils of Engaging Rogue Regimes." Gee. Let me think of a rogue regime. It starts with the big I, and there are others, and we'll talk about it when we come back right here on the Steve Malzberg Show on Newsmax Television.
The Steve